Hello and welcome, folks. We're going to give everyone just another minute or so before we get started. Great to see you all here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started. We will continue letting people into the Zoom room as they pop up in our waiting room, but I want to be respectful of our time since we've only got an hour here together. So welcome. My name is Christy Ashby, and on behalf of the Center on Disability and Inclusion and the Neurodiversity at SU Initiative, we would like to welcome you to this talk by Dr. Nick Walker, titled Anti-Oppressive Approaches to Teaching Neurodivergent Students. Following Dr. Walker's presentation, there will be an opportunity for question and answer. During her presentation, please keep your audio muted and your camera on if you are comfortable. It helps us to build community if we can engage with each other visually. During the Q&A, you'll have an opportunity to either share your question in the chat or use the raise hand function to indicate you wish to share out loud with the group. So what is the CDI? The Center on Disability and Inclusion at Syracuse University. We're a disability-related research center, and our work is all focused on developing and implementing initiatives that promote inclusion of people with disabilities in all aspects of school and society. We do work both locally here in Central New York and also all across the globe. This event today is part of our Neurodiversity at SU initiative, with the generous support of the Siebold family. So as part of our neurodiversity initiative, we reached out to our students in an ongoing attempt to understand how can we best improve their experience here on campus. So this is an initiative really focused on SU students, undergraduate, graduate, matriculated, and non-matriculated students who identify as autistic and neurodivergent. And when we talked with our students about what would improve their experience of Syracuse University, there were really four themes that came through. One was improve the climate on campus, the general sort of climate related to disability generally and neurodiversity specifically. They wanted opportunities and more spaces to connect and ways to find their people here on campus. So we've been working to do that. And then the next two were really about their own learning and development, and students reported wanting some opportunities to engage around specific topics of interest to them, but also perhaps even more importantly, building capacity of faculty and staff. Faculty and staff's understanding of the experiences of neurodivergent students and strategies and supports and ways to make our campus a more, not just accessible, but supportive space, and a space that acknowledges disability as a really valued aspect of identity and not a problem to be solved. So we are really excited that you are here today. We are very excited to be bringing Dr. Nick Walker. I'm going to share Nick's bio with you here today. Dr. Walker is a transdisciplinary scholar, author, and futurist whose work explores the edges and intersections of somatic psychology, depth psychology, queer theory, neurodiversity, embodiment, and transformative practice. She is a faculty member at California Institute of Integral Studies, a senior Aikido instructor at the Aiki Arts Center in Berkeley, author of the book Neuroqueer Heresies, and one of the foundational thinkers in the emerging field of neurodiversity studies. We are thrilled to have Dr. Walker here with us this afternoon, and I really am looking forward to a rich and robust discussion. So Dr. Walker, I'm going to turn it over to you now, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so it's easier for us all to engage with each other.
All right, thank you, Christy. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for having me here and for showing up. If you feel comfortable and are wearing clothes, I encourage you to turn your camera on to foster the interactivity here. I do like to, I always wish that I was present in person for these things, although this is certainly, convenient to be able to do it from the comfort of my home, and hopefully you're all comfortable wherever you are. I do like to be interactive, and particularly around actually addressing what's relevant to you, because I come in never knowing just how much a given audience knows where you're at with this whole process of developing your relationship with neurodiversity and neurodivergence. And so what I like to do is do a relatively short presentation, run through some basics, and then spend a lot of time on Q&A and answer really in depth, because I want to know that I'm actually addressing questions you've got rather than questions that I'm imagining you've got. And let's talk a little bit about defining our terms here. So I'm going to use a term here, which is neurominority. And that's a term that I coined way back in 2004. And talk about neurominority students, meaning autistic students, students with kinetic cognitive style, which is in the pathology world called ADHD, dyslexic students. So groups that are neurodivergent in particular distinct ways, that have sometimes, certainly in the case of autistic people, emergent cultures, and that are disabled often through lack of accommodation. And so the reason that I'm not using neurodivergent to describe these people is I'm old friends with Cassiana Asasumas, who coined the term neurodivergent way back in like 1999, 2000. And I always promise Cassiana that when I, in my writing about neurodivergence, I'm going to be true to her original intention with the term, which is that it's any divergence from neuronormativity. And so that includes, of course, all neurominority groups: autistic, KCS, dyslexic, Down syndrome. It also includes people with acquired neurodivergence, like PTSD, for instance, people with Alzheimer's and such. And it includes people who are not disabled at all. For instance, being a Zen master is a form of neurodivergence, because long-term Zen meditation alters your brain in significant ways from dominant societal norms. So I like to be really specific with my language and say neurominority, because neurodivergent is a much broader category that includes disabled and non-disabled people, and it includes people like autistic people who, generally speaking, don't benefit from attempts to cure them of being autistic. But neurodivergent also includes people with PTSD who definitely benefit from treatments for PTSD. So neurominority will be the term of the day here. So let's talk about neurominority students. And Christy shared a few, specific interests and concerns of the student population. And the one I really want to address is faculty and staff, and how faculty and staff can improve the climate. Because in terms of creating spaces to connect, generally speaking, what I found is that students who want that to happen will find ways to do it on their own. It's kind of a little dicey to expect faculty and staff at a university to create the spaces for one. They're not preventing students from creating spaces, I assume. So we want to I would encourage neurominority students to start creating spaces and start creating conversations and start creating groups and meeting and connecting with each other. Great idea, certainly. But in terms of the environment, educating the staff and faculty is very important. And the curriculum makes a difference, especially curriculum is makes a difference, because what happens, and I'm going to use autistic students as my major example here, because I think this comes up in particularly strongly with autistic students. But what happens is often you get a very well-intentioned staff, very well-intentioned administration. You have a Center on Disability and Inclusion, and they really want neurominority students to feel included, and they create events like this. And students feel very welcome. And then they sit down in the classroom or sit down to read the assigned reading, and they're talked about in the readings and lectures in a way that's extremely dehumanizing and stigmatizing. And suddenly they don't feel so welcome. Suddenly all the other efforts to create a welcoming climate for neurominority students kind of become irrelevant when the actual, at its core, you're a university. You're here for the classes and the education. And so if the content of the classes and education is hostile to people like you, it doesn't matter how welcoming the rest of the climate is. It kind of blows everything else out of the water. So that's the curriculum issues are crucial. And this really, this is hard for a university to address, I find, particularly because you get faculty who are very set in their ways and attached to the things that they've learned and maybe have been teaching for decades. And we, as a longtime faculty member myself, I'm certainly not a fan of restricting academic freedom on the part of faculty members. I wouldn't want what I teach to be censored by the school administration. It's kind of why I teach where I do. But at the same time, it's like, how can you educate faculty on this? And it's maybe assume good intention on the part of the faculty, but so much of the material out there is really is awful, is bigoted. And we've run into the same situation historically with any oppressed minority group, right? That for centuries, really, and until not that long ago, racism was so baked into the established fabric of society, and it still is, of course, in many ways, and, the criminal justice system and such, but it was baked into the curriculum where racism would masquerade as science. There have this whole phenomena of scientific racism, of science that looks really badly done when we look at it critically now. But at the time, everybody bought into the science that purported to demonstrate racial differences and, uphold white supremacy. And rooting that out of the curriculum, was a very difficult process for a lot of schools to root that out and be like, let's update this. Now, of course, if you go to an African American studies class, you expect probably to have a Black instructor and to be reading a lot of work by African American scholars. But that wasn't the case, 50 years ago. If you wanted to learn about African American culture, you'd end up like going to some anthropology class with this, awful ancient, racist research, and it was all white colonial scholars talking about Black people. And so that's been a very, it was a very gradual shift, a lot of which happened during my own lifetime around homosexuality. Huge shift. Again, when I was a kid, homosexuality was in the DSM. It was a diagnosis, homosexual paraphilia, and you could be institutionalized for it. And the college curriculum around it, if you learned about what it meant to be gay, it wasn't in a gender studies class or a queer studies class or anything like that. You learn about it in a psychopathology class where they talk about people suffering from homosexual paraphilia. And, if you had a psychoanalytic professor, they would talk about how, the childhood issues had caused it. Or if you had a behaviorist professor, they would talk about how to do gay conversion therapy to cure your clients of homosexuality. That was baked into the curriculum. You don't find it there now, really. It's archaic. It leaps out at you if you hit an old textbook that has that kind of material in it. It really leaps out as, whoa, what is this? This is so mid 20th century, but that's been a major shift. And so these shifts do happen, which is wonderful, and they take a lot of effort. And where we're at now is we're the very around neurodiversity and around specific neurominority groups, autistic people, especially KCS people. We are at the very beginning of that shift. I think we're in the very early stages. We are where the discourse on homosexuality was 70 years ago. So it's a challenge. A lot of, and again, these days, you go to an African American studies class, you can expect to be reading, Black scholars talking about African American experience, not white people talking over Black people. You go to, a queer theory class, you could expect to be reading queer scholars. You go to a feminist theory class, you expect to be reading women scholars and not a lot of men talking about women. And that's, but you go to, when you're in a class and you're learning, when the subject of autism, say, comes up, what you encounter generally is material by non-autistic people, taught by non-autistic people, written by non-autistic people, based on research and speculation conducted by non-autistic people. And there's no autistic voices. Or there's Temple Grandin, who's like this dinosaur who's made a career out of telling non-autistic people what they want to hear. But there's what happens often, though, is I'll tell you, as a faculty member, I'm very sympathetic to faculty trying to make a shift like this, because it is hard to keep up with a field. You're teaching and doing your own writing and your own work and such, and there's constantly new material being published. And it's very hard to keep up with what's happening in the field. It really requires a lot of attention and effort and this sort of conscious. I actually have like reminders on my calendar. Hey, check this journal and see if anything new has sprung up. Because it is hard to keep track of, and sometimes discourse in a given field can evolve very quickly, as is certainly happening with work around neurominority experience, where the field of neurodiversity studies, I mean, I remember in 2015 giving talks where I would say we need a field of neurodiversity studies. And now there is one, but that's new. And people aren't even necessarily clear on what it consists of. So it's a lot of what happens is you get a professor who, they're teaching, here they are teaching psychology, say, or they're teaching about, cognitive science, and this topic of autism comes up, and they know what they learned in school in the 1980s, 1990s, when there was almost nothing published by autistic scholars. And the field has changed so much now, and a lot of them are just unaware of it. A lot of faculty members are just unaware of what's out there and how autistic scholars have reshaped the available knowledge around autistic experience. So educating faculty is crucial there. And I think that there's certain essentials there in terms of making the paradigm shift. So I've written about a paradigm shift around how we talk about neurominority groups, making a paradigm shift from what I call the pathology paradigm to the neurodiversity paradigm. And that shift is difficult to make. In my own book, Neuroqueer Heresy, is kind of a compilation of my own work on the topic. Yurgo's book, Authoring Autism, I think, is essential reading for, it's great for students. It's kind of written at a pretty advanced, graduate level, but it's absolutely essential reading for faculty in terms of critiquing the old and still dominant discourse. So this whole topic potentially looks very complex. How do you update curriculum and for faculty? And how do you update how you talk about neurominority groups? How do you update how you talk about autistic people, given how stigmatized it is? And also for staff, for administration and staff, for office accessibility services or whatever your equivalent is, when students, when students go in looking for accommodations, or just administrative departments in general, on-campus counselors. How do you get everyone updated on this? And obviously, read autistic writings and become familiar with what's out there, but there's a really simple key to it. And when I say simple, it doesn't mean it's easy. It doesn't mean it takes a good deal of intention and mindfulness and persistence to implement. But there's a simple trick to this, and that everything hinges on this, which is when you're talking about autistic people, or when you're or any other minority group, when you're talking about autistic people, or when you're looking at what work you're going to assign, what readings you're going to assign about autistic people, or when you're reading something critically, when you're trying to make when you're a staff or faculty member trying to educate yourself, and you've picked up a book and you're not sure if it's good or not, there's a really basic question to ask. You look at what's written, or what is about to come out of your mouth, and you say, what would it be like if I talked this way about a member of another minority group? what would it be like? What would it sound like coming out of my mouth if I were talking about gay people, or if I were talking about a racialized minority group? And that is, if you can apply that diligently, that's an eye opener. And that's the key to making the shift, because I'll tell you, the things that are said about autistic people in classroom lectures and the curriculum, and in terms of, what practices are recommended to psych students and education students and such, the things that people talk about, that even just in casual conversation, the way people talk about autistic people and often other neurominority groups, you would have an uproar on campus if there were people talking on, if there were staff and faculty members talking about members of any other minority group that way. And so it's a matter of learning to read it that way and to recognize, like, okay, here's this, here's this book on, here's the psychology book, here's this, and it's on cognitive psychology, and it says autistic people lack empathy or lack something called theory of mind, and have communication deficits. And think about that in terms of, okay, what if you had an immigrant population who came in and they didn't speak the local language? And so translation and effort was required on both sides to bridge that gap, not just of language, but of culture and the different cultural practices and different cultural attitudes and such. Would you describe the incoming immigrant group as having communication deficits? Hopefully not. My hope would be that you would recognize this as, okay, here's two groups that think and communicate differently, and so it becomes the work of everyone to bridge these gaps. But in the discourse on autism, it's blamed on communication deficits rather than, and nobody talks about the non-autistic communication deficits and how horribly impaired non-autistic people are in their ability to understand autistic people or communicate with them well. So, or you get things describing autistic people as, high functioning or low functioning based on this assumption that being non-autistic is the right way to function. And, what would it be like to take any other minority group and rate them as higher or lower based on how well they pass for a member of the dominant majority? So, yeah, that key, what would it be like, just recognizing that, is recognizing when you hear about autistic people, lacking empathy, for instance, or lacking theory of mind, or lacking self-awareness. What this is a projection. It's a cultural stereotype by the dominant majority based on a projection onto a minority group. And it's no different from any racist stereotype that's ever existed. It's just another, and it, again, if you want that, if you want to see through the stereotype, you got to read, familiarize yourself with the work of autistic people and start reading from their perspective. So that is, I think, the central shift that would need to happen on the faculty and staff end of things. And I'm going to, at this point, we're like halfway through our time, because boy, time does fly, and I really want to make sure to address your questions. So I'm going to open it up and start taking questions. I will say that I am not looking at the chat because I kind of, I want to be focused on you all here. And so I'll need someone else to bring it to my attention and read it if there's a question in the chat that I should address. But let's open it up to whoever wants to, put up a hand or post in the chat. And I see Aiden's got a hand up. Go for it.
Hi, I had a question about writing center pedagogy. So I'm working on a project for my writing center practicum class, and a large portion of this course includes being a peer tutor in the writing center. I'm actually in there right now. And the paper I'm writing about is how writing center pedagogies can better adapt to assist its students with ADHD. Now, do you have any pieces of advice for this with the context that writing center sessions last about 30 minutes to an hour and require focused one-on-one engagement? Now, I just want to say before, when I was preparing this question, I wasn't aware that what we were going to be talking about, what we were talking about is a little more broad than what I was thinking. But yeah, do you have any specific pieces of advice in a writing setting?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And don't worry, I gave the broad part. Now we get to the specifics. So this is a great specific. This is exactly the kind of question I'm looking for here. Yeah, so when you're working with what I would call KCS students, just because ADHD sounds so pathologizing to me, but when you're working with that particular student population, yeah, their cognitive style makes it very challenging to do that sustained focus. I think it is crucial to set the right atmosphere, because what you've got with KCS is you've got a roving attention style, what I call a kinetic attention style, where the attention is constantly drawn to novelty and new stimulus. And it's got a sound evolutionary purpose. I mean, if you're a hunter-gatherer in a hunting party, you want this person in your hunting party because they're the ones whose attention is going to be immediately drawn to anything novel and strange going on, and that's how you survive. And so there's that issue with the attention, which is not inherently a problem always in every situation, but it's a problem if the person really wants to focus on a particular thing for a length of time. And then there's another problem layered on top of that, which is the trauma that someone with that cognitive style will carry with them from being shamed for focusing differently than the majority. And there's a lot of anxiety that comes with that. And so what happens when you sit down and it's like, okay, we got to sit down and focus for like 30 to 60 minutes right here. What happens is there's not just the ordinary fact, the everyday fact of their attention tending to move to the new things, but there's also the attention is disrupted much further by the anxiety that happens of, oh no, here I am being asked with an audience one-on-one with someone I don't want to disappoint to do this thing that I'm really bad at. And it's like the word focus becomes a trauma trigger where it brings up all the anxiety. Oh no, I have to focus for 30 minutes and I'll be in trouble if I don't. And it's and that's becomes an impossible situation to concentrate in. And so I think a crucial thing is to let go of the attachment to like the idea that you are going to focus with them for 30 to 60 minutes. It's not actually going to happen. But it will happen a little better if the pressure's not there. If you don't have a sense of anxiety around how do we get this to happen, and are just like, okay, here we are, and some amount of our time is going to be spent on the writing project at hand, and some of it just isn't. And that's actually the best way to get any time spent on that effectively. Is to accept that it might not be as focused as you might hope with a non-KCS student. In terms of strategies, work with the wandering attention. So let go of the linear process. I've seen there's some very interesting work emerging in the KCS community now around the fact that their time perception is actually different and less linear than other people's. And so I would say embrace a nonlinear process, like talk about what they're trying to communicate in their writing. And when something useful comes up, when something important comes up that belongs in their writing, have them write that down and skip around, let them skip around wildly and put this thing together in a nonlinear piece by piece way. Yeah. And then, and then at some point it's got to be stitched together and polished, but a lot of it can be built in a nonlinear way that's about following the attention jumping around to this aspect and that aspect, and just, get them talking about it. And when something comes up, you can be like, that seems to fit, be like, ooh, write that down, put that in there, and teaching them to do it for themselves and to embrace the fact that their optimal process may very well be nonlinear. So that's my suggestion. Right.
Thank you.
Sure. I see a question from Corin. Go for it.
Right. Thank you.
Hi.
Good guess. So can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Oh, now I can't. Oh, there we go.
Oh, two questions.
Yes.
One is a big question about
Your sound is cutting in and out, unfortunately.
let me do this. Now?
Yes.
Okay, I disconnected the headphones. Okay.
Yes.
So, two questions. One is about the issue, the difficulty of instituting these shifts in attention or mindset for faculty in particular in a university that believes it's meritocratic and believes in meritocracy, right? It believes in its hierarchies. And so I would love to hear you talk about that. The other thing I would love to hear you talk about, these are broad questions, so we're back to the broad, is the ways in which, as a parent of a neuro minority child, the ways in which I was so struck by the way you were talking to Aiden about this scene of teaching, this scene pedagogy, and as I learn more about neurodiversity and neurominority, I have just all these parenting regrets because my kid now is 23 years old, and I'm thinking about all the scenes of shame that I created because of my own normative structures. And I'm thinking about these structures of, this difference between a parent with one set of a kind of pretty normative not completely normative, because nobody is, but, and that kind of things, parenting model. And, so I think because many of us in the university are also parents, and then that relationship also between faculty and students. So I guess that I just love to hear you talk more about any of those things.
Okay. Well, I'll say, in terms of the hierarchy issue, I believe in meritocracy. I believe that we have an illusion of meritocracy often in this culture, where inherited wealth and privilege is mistaken for merit. But I do, as having been, a martial arts teacher for over 40 years, I will say, hierarchies based on long-term dedication and talent and hard work are essential sometimes. So I, I can't fault the idea of meritocracy across the board. I think that the better faculty members, the ones who are still actively engaged with the learning process, the ones who really do have merit in the sense that they're lifelong learners, will be open to the shift once they become aware of it, because it's learning, it's knowledge, it's a chance to evolve. How can that not be exciting to a true scholar? You will get people who are just set in their ways, who are like, I'm a full tenured professor and why should I change? And this newfangled stuff will go away. And I'm sticking with the tried and true behaviorism I learned in 1950. That happens. Paradigm shifts take multiple generations, because sometimes you have to wait for the old generation to die out or retire and a new generation to come in that's more familiar with the emerging ideas. So sometimes that's just how it is. And, that's okay. I honestly, when I think about, some professor who's like, I'm kind of old these days myself. So when I start thinking about an aged professor who's a few years away from retirement and doesn't want to change, I'm like, let them serve out their term, let them do their thing. And if the rest of the climate is good, people can be like, okay, well, we recognize that this person's a member of the old guard and we can respect that. And, so sometimes it just, those compromises have to happen, and shifts take time. The parenting, I will tell you, parent to parent, as a parent of an angry teenager, that we just never, like, that's the nature of parenting, regardless of cognitive styles or anything like that. It's just, we're never as good as we want to be. In retrospect, we always see how we could have done better. And, every difficulty our children have, we think about how we could have done it better. And that's just the nature of parenting. There's a certain amount of grief that comes with it. And I will say, though, there's a wonderful book, and I'm just gonna, the smart professors, what they do is they do what Christine's doing here. They have the books on the wall behind them, so you can see that they're knowledgeable because they have books. And the less bright ones, like me, set up our spaces so that you can't see the books. So it just looks like I have a couch behind me and a nap on. I'm like, I don't actually do anything, but I do have a huge wall of books over here. And I'm just going to step over here for a moment and get a book to show you. This book here, called "I Will Die on This Hill," by a non-autistic child of a parent of an autistic child, and then by an autistic Indigenous woman, also with autistic children. This just came out, and I highly recommend it to anyone who is parenting a neurominority child, especially an autistic child. This is just an amazing book for parents. Highly recommended. So, having made that endorsement, yeah, let's see. What other questions do we have floating around? Oh, Aiden, I see your hands up again. Go for it.
Hi, so I just want to preface by saying that I have ADHD and I was medicated at a young age. I'm no longer medicated, but I've spent lots of time learning how to learn. So studying neurodivergence is a real passion of mine. So I'm doing another project that I have a question about, and this project has two main aspects. So it talks about how people with neurodivergence that can overcome its effects, in a sense, can be wildly successful because of what I'm labeling as implicit hardship. The implicit hardship refers to the inevitable circumstances that someone with these conditions will face. Now, the other part is about something you mentioned earlier about opening up spaces for conversation. So I have written here, the neurodivergent community is in an interesting social position compared to other minorities. As a member of this community, I do not feel that it has a centralized voice or sense of unity, as you discussed. And I think that has a lot to do with the nature of neurodivergence. Members of the community are spread across all demographics of individuals. And with the new word I learned today, neurominority, being a neurominority is not an aspect of personal identity that people are particularly proud of. So with that in mind, with the fact that neurodivergence, neurominorities are so spread out, how do you recommend that this community create and fill spaces for representation?
It really depends on the context, like how many of you there are in a given university and such. I'm not a fan of identity politics, generally speaking. I found that it's useful to form community sometimes for a purpose of getting change made or comparing experiences. But, I'm a practitioner of Aikido and Zen and various other spiritual practices. And when I think about who my community is, it's the people who are engaged in that sort of practice and the people who are engaged in a certain kind of personal and cultural transformative work. And no other aspect of identity matters to me. And I've found that attempts to build a community around, shared neurocognitive tendencies, or really any other shared trait that people have turned into a social identity label. It's not always that great. The people who actually are my community come from a very wide diversity of cultures and ethnicities and genders and ages and such, and that's not I think that starting dialogues around like, hey, I'm ADHD/KCS, and I want to talk to other people who are and compare notes, like see what happens, experiment. But I think the autistic community in particular, over the past few decades, has made a serious mistake in starting to think of, like, with autistic people, starting to think of other autistic people as like, this is my community, these are my people. And that's often not the case. Often what I find that if the only thing I have in common with someone else is that we're both autistic, there's not really a good connection there, and it can't be forced. And so the people I connect with best mostly are not autistic. And it's just, I think space for conversation is important, but building that space around specific identities, not so much. More like, who's interested in these ideas? Who's interested in doing this kind of work? Build spaces around that and see what happens.
Thank you.
All right, Carly.
Hi, I'm going to actually send it to Erin.
Okay, go for it.
And then I will go next. I'm just reading a question from the chat.
Sure.
Hi, thank you, Carly. And thanks, Dr. Walker, for everything that you've shared so far.
Sure.
I'm really interested in particular. I'm working on a project right now that involves translating or disseminating a lot of information regarding neurodiversity, autism acceptance to a more general population. Like specifically, I'm working with in a school for K-8 teachers and school staff. I'm curious if you can speak to it all, or if you have any tips or strategies for sharing these kinds of views and perspectives and ideas that may seem really radical to some folks, and especially folks who may be coming from a more pathologizing or deficit focused model when they think about autism and neurominority people.
Yeah, it is. It is going to be radical. It just is. Like, it is a radical shift. And I think, make it clear. manage people's expectations about it. Like, yeah, this is going to be radical and this is going to be uncomfortable because it will contradict things that you've heard. And I think that's in terms of translation, think about who you're dealing with and what they need to hear or how they need to hear it. But I would not recommend trying to translate it by watering it down. It doesn't work because there's no disguising the fact that this is radical, that we're talking about a highly, highly stigmatized minority groups where the things that have been taught about them in the mainstream for decades are just wrong. And there's no way to do anti-racist work in a non-radical way. There's no way to there's no way to go to a white supremacist community or, just people who've been taught racism all their lives and try to get them to be just a little bit non-racist. Like it just is a radical idea to embrace the humanity of people who are different from oneself. If it's being, so yeah, I think that, and sometimes the radical ideas have a better chance of getting through. That's people are more likely to make radical shifts, I think, often than small shifts. Is what I found. Even looking at people recovering from addiction, that so often I'm going to cut down a little bit doesn't work nearly as much as I'm going to 12-step meetings. I'm cutting myself off completely, that's actually has a better chance of working. So yeah, I don't be scared of the radical aspect, and don't be scared of disturbing people because you will disturb them. And that's necessary for change. Change is not comfortable at first until one learns to, until one learns to do the letting go processes around it, and that's a a serious transformative process. So that book, again, that book, I Will Die on This Hill, that I recommended is a very nice, friendly, accessible one because it's written, for parents primarily. So it also works for, elementary school educators and such, but it doesn't require like a high education level or anything to get through. Pulling books off the shelf that are a little closer here, my own book, Neuroqueer Heresies. I mean, okay, I'm a little biased in recommending this book, but this lays it out and it does ruffle feathers. It's called Heresies for a reason. It's not called, Neuroqueer Polite Suggestions. And but it's one that I assign it to my psych undergrads, and it's one that I think is really essential because I wrote it very specifically to introduce people to the idea of making the paradigm shift. For more advanced learners, for people who, if you're training people who are trained educators and have been through grad school and can handle some serious academic work, Yurgo's book, Authoring Autism, is hard to read, but is absolutely the most comprehensive critique of the pathology paradigm that exists. So yeah, that's my recommendations. And again, you'll get people protesting, especially people trained in behaviorist methodologies, really do not respond well to ideas that humanize autistic people. And that's challenging. You could drop me an email and I'll send you some links or something to articles or something that you can, give to the behaviorist defenders. I'll tell you, Neuroclastic is a great website. Check out Neuroclastic and just like use the search function on their site to search for ABA, and you'll get a very impressive collection of articles that are good for I mean, again, either you'll change people's minds or you'll drive them away completely, and sometimes it does come down to that choice, and it's really a matter of where they are when they're awakened. Are they open to being awakened to a higher ethical level of conducting themselves, or are they not? And some people just won't be. All right, Carly.
Okay, I'm conscious of time. First, I would like to just share some lovely feedback from Shelby in the chat, who says the fact that you're reflecting on your parenting and willing to ask questions and explore topics that may be uncomfortable speaks volumes. Thank you, with a heart.
Oh.
So if you, and then I have a question from Maria. Would you like me to ask your question, Maria? Okay. As a staff member, I'm interested in hearing about the specific resources that we can offer to students when they arrive to campus for orientation. I work with graduate students. Thank you.
Okay. That's an interesting question. It depends very much on, I guess, what the students' needs are. I would say, what I would recommend, again, it depends on what kind of questions you're getting from the students, what they need. What I would recommend is have someone in, your Center on Disability and Inclusion who takes responsibility for really getting deeply educated on this stuff, who's really, will do the readings, like the ones I recommended and other readings really deeply, and have them be a contact point for students. Have them be recommended to students as like this person will be your contact point on this. If there are groups put together, like if Aiden goes ahead and puts together, neurominority student groups or connections, then that's something that can be recommended to them. So yeah, I think that's where to go, is human connections. Like this is a group that you can connect with. This is a specific staff member that you can connect with. And that's, just knowing who they can reach out to, I think, is a crucial first step in terms of orientation. All right, I think we have time for like one more question. So let's do it.
We have another question from.
Or not, that's fine too. Seems like a good point then. So I want to thank you all, and again, encourage you to check out the readings that are available, educate yourselves on that, and it's just been a pleasure getting to be here and speak with you. So thanks very much for putting this all together. Thank you.
Thanks everyone so much. We just want to highlight, we have an event coming up as part of Disability Pride week here at Syracuse University. It's called Neurocurious, and it's being held April 21st from 3 to 5. So if you want to learn more and talk with folks who are thinking about what neurodiversity means and how to think about it on a college campus, I encourage you to reach out. I also encourage you to check out all the events happening around campus during Disability Pride Week. And I want to thank all of you for being here, and especially a heartfelt thank you to Dr. Nick Walker for sharing her insights, and for being part of our community here today. We are deeply appreciative for your time. We want to thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a fabulous evening.
Thanks. Bye.